Midway's lawyers are on a tear, Atari's profits are breaking records, and Apple bets on the luck of the Irish. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man.
What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me!
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm your host, Carl, and as always, here's my co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Excellent. So, we're doing something slightly different for the long-time listeners. We are changing the format. Not changing the idea of going back in the time machine to check out the news stories from 40, 30, and 20 years ago, but instead of doing them in one giant 3-hour episode, we're going to be breaking it down, one time jump per episode, and we're going to be releasing them 1 week apart, just to see whether or not it becomes slightly more palatable to less hardcore audiences. So for those of you who relished just zoning out for 3 hours as we droned on, sorry, you can still just wait until all 3 episodes are out and then put them on in a row. But for everybody else, hopefully this will make the show slightly more accessible. So Peter, guess we have to do some banter. How have you been in the post-election world that we are now in?
I'm rather busy and rather successful, if I am allowed to say so myself.
Excellent.
Some negotiations going on for the new hospital we're building, and I saved like 100,000 euros doing so.
Very nice, very nice. Squeezing people in a pandemic. That's the kind of heroism that only a Ferengi would know how to appreciate.
Yes.
And this is why we have an MBA on the show, people, to be able to humanize some of these stories, or something. And I've been okay. Sick the last couple days. Fortunately, not COVID, but I've been sick and had to delay a couple of things. So, did get a new Patreon early access interview up. The first half of my 4-hour talk with Mike Dornbrook, one of the original Infocom people. He was there at the very beginning and then later on, involved in a bunch of other companies, including Harmonix. So, super interesting interview, super nice guy. First 2 hours of that are up, so for as little as a $1 contribution to our Patreon, you can access that and a bunch of other interviews that are still early access over there. And for those who aren't Patreons, you hopefully have already listened to our interview with Jerry Wolosenko, which went up a couple weeks ago. Another industry veteran, super interesting stuff going on there. And we've got a few more interviews in the pipeline. Some have already been recorded. Got a really good one coming up first week of December that I'm really, really looking forward to, but don't want to spoil it just yet. Mm-hmm. So I've been keeping busy.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Yes. Before we jump through time, let's check in with Ethan to find out what we messed up last time. Welcome back to the show, Ethan. So, what did we mess up this time?
All right, we're back to the Gestapo of corrections here. So, first we'll be covering 1980, as we're having splits now. The first primary one, and the one which Jack Trammell went to his grave, hoping people would not repeat, is you calling him Tramiel.
Oh, damn. I mean, there's an I and an E in there. Come on.
Yeah, but he purposefully, when he started up a new company, which eventually he bought Atari with, he purposefully misspelled it as Tramel to make sure that people would pronounce it right. So you are going against his dying wish and insisting on pronouncing it Trumio.
Okay. I'm sorry, Jack. And your boys. I will try, even though I'll probably still mess it up, try to call him Tramel.
Okay. The second one, you were talking about how Hayden Books was purchasing Programma International as a computer game publisher. And you said that it was a weird purchase and they were just kind of, trying this very far-flung business they didn't know anything about. But in fact, Hayden was one of the first software publishers. They had published Sargon, which was one of the earliest chess programs back in 1976 for microcomputers. So they were actually pretty experienced in this. They weren't huge, and they were still mainly a book publisher, and most of their most important parts of their computer output was publishing computer books. But it's not right to say that they didn't have any idea how the retail space worked, especially because the retail space was like nothing. They managed to make Sargon the top computer program of that era. We don't know exact figures for it, and it probably wasn't a whole lot. But they probably used their existing retail networks to get that going. So they were actually more experienced than anyone in that space. They may not have kept up with the times, and eventually they wouldn't publish computer software anymore. But Hayden was not just a duck with its head cut off.
Gotcha. Okay, I did not know that. Thank you for the update.
The last one is you were talking 1980 AMOA. By the way, go listen to the special episode with me. And you used the phrase that it was the last gasp of Japanese imports, that this was the last opportunity for big games to come in from Japan and be put out by an American company. And while the dynamics did shift, that was definitely not the last time that happened. Because after the crash, you have these kit companies. And these kit companies were primarily doing stuff from Japan. You had Kit Corp, which was a partner with Sunsoft. And you had Romstar, which was a partial partner with SNK. It's kind of complicated. But they put out games like Bubble Bobble and Double Dragon 2 and 1942 from Capcom. They all as kits, not as the full upright games. But it's still imports and it's still American companies, some who would later go on to become the American arms of Japanese companies, putting out Japanese software.
Gotcha. And yeah, I knew there was some stuff. I guess what I was referring to was like the big purchases, games like Space Invaders and Galaxian and so forth, being able to be brought over by a U.S. Manufacturer. But of course, there's still going to be a ton of games coming through. And that was just my bad.
Yeah, I mean, everything went down as an order of magnitude. But I think that those kit games that get imported are about as big as the games get in that era, except for, just the central, the hottest things around, like Street Fighter 2 or something like that.
Good point, yeah. And that's going to be quite a ways down the line. So, okay. Do we have any other corrections for 1980?
Nope, there's 1980 for you.
Excellent. Well, then we'll see you next week for 1990.
It's always astonishing me how much we've messed up.
Yes, it is. But at least it's job security for Ethan.
Exactly. So we're basically doing this for you.
You're welcome, Ethan. You're welcome. So, I guess we shouldn't be wasting too much time here. So remember, when we turn on the time machine, we're going back, this time 40 years, to November of 1980. And remember that all the stories that we're going to be talking about, we are basing the dates off of the cover dates of magazines and newspapers. So obviously the stories themselves happened a little bit earlier than that, but just to keep the system consistent, we're using the cover dates on magazines. And remember, if you like what you hear here, you can leave us a comment. Please, give us a like, thumbs up, star ratings, whatever is available in your podcast app of choice. You can also follow us on Twitter at Video Game News R2, on Instagram, or just send us an email at the unbelievably simple email address videogamenewsroomtimemachine@gmail.com. So, and the Patreon as well, and that's linked down below.
Always forget to ask for money.
This is why I'm the lawyer and not the MBA here. I don't have to ask for money as a lawyer. The client signed a contract ahead of time. Okay.
So really don't have to ask for money.
Ready to rock and roll?
Ready to go.
Okay, we're going to turn on the time machine and head back to November of 1980.
Personal computers that can swallow a book. 1980.
Games people play.
Welcome to November of 1980. Peter, what's our first headline?
Universal settles suit with Midway.
Midway, who have the North American distribution rights for Galaxian, had sued Universal over their game Cosmic Alien, which was maybe just a tad too much like Galaxian. We reported on the filing of the suit back in our July episode. Neither side admitted any fault, and Universal will cease importing the game as part of the settlement. According to the report in Replay magazine, quote, the parties have endorsed the principle that video games are a product that can and should be protected by the respective owners in the interest of fostering creativity in the video game industry, end quote. Now, as those listeners who have listened to our Joe Morici interview know, this wouldn't stop Universal from continuing to gray import games for a while longer, and basically still be a thorn in the side of this whole idea of the protection of copyrights, but they would not go ahead and try to release a straight clone of another game.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why those Space Invaders guys didn't sue any of them.
Well, the Space Invaders stuff, I think there were some lawsuits about enhancement boards and so forth, but for the most part, the Space Invaders thing, the cat was out of the bag at that point. And also it was such an early phenomenon that I don't think anybody was quite aware of what they were sitting on. Remember, Space Invaders is big in the United States, but it's not the earth-shattering bigness that it was in Japan. So from that standpoint, even though the game is distributed in the U.S. by Midway, and oh, heaven help me if I got that one wrong, but I believe it's Midway, it doesn't have the sales numbers that it had in Japan. I mean, it's huge. Don't get me wrong, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment in another story. But the cat was out of the bag. The clones were everywhere, and it just wasn't. Nobody was quite ready for that battle. But nobody is going to be sitting back and letting that happen to any future games. And we're seeing that here with Galaxian. And we're not done with legal battles yet.
Oh, no. Because Midway wanted some payback. And Midway filed suit against Arctic for Galaxian speed-up kits.
Following on the heels of their settlement with Universal, Midway is now turning from clones to speed-up kits. Arctic International Incorporated has released a speed-up board for Galaxian, and Midway will have none of it. The suit would drag on for a bit and end up also incorporating Arctic's Pac-Man modification board, Puckman. The battle against add-on boards is only just beginning, though, as ads in this month's Playmeter magazine are promoting speed-up boards for Galaxian, Asteroids, Space Invaders, and many more. And an extensive article about the rise of so-called Xerox effect games highlights the difficulties facing an industry that has yet established how copyright law applies to its innovative, non-linear products.
So, explain a little bit to me. For me, an add-on usually is some piece of software you install and add something to a game or to a software or to whatnot. So, how did those add-on boards work?
Well, these add-on boards, an add-on doesn't have to just be software. You're thinking of an add-on to a game, for example, like DLC. But your 3D card in your computer is an add-on. It's not required for the computer to function, but it adds additional processing power. And that's essentially what's happening with these add-on boards. Now, there's some code involved as well. I mean, sometimes they're changing sprites around or changing other aspects of the game. But quite often what the speed-up boards are basically just tweaks to the CPU. So they're adding new stuff to the CPU, changing out for a faster CPU or an overclocked CPU. And this is what's making the machines run faster. Okay. And the idea of the faster running game basically just means that the players are going to die sooner, because a lot of these games are literally just, level 1, it's slow. Level 2, it's a little bit faster. Level 3 is a little bit faster. Level 5 is a little bit faster, blah, blah, blah. And if you get to level 5 speed on level 2, and the player's only good enough to get to level 5, well, guess what? They're going to die on level 2, which basically means that their quarter lasted less, and now you can get that next quarter from the next player.
So those speed-up boards, they are bought from the owner of the cabinets in order to like get more quarters out of the people, or is it like something you can advertise as, hey, we also have the speed-up version. You really wanna like get to it?
No, well, it's not the manufacturers who are selling it for the most part. Now, sometimes the manufacturers will be like, we may have gotten the balance on the game wrong. I've seen an ad for Atari doing this, saying, that game we released, it was a little too easy here, here are some ways to tweak it so that it runs better. But for the most part, these are third parties, and they're coming in and tweaking the games. Now, the reason why the original manufacturer doesn't want to do this is that there's a limited number of options for them to create a sequel game in a relatively short period of time. So the easiest way to create a sequel is you just create a slightly faster version of it. So why would you sell an add-on board for $100 when you can sell them a whole new cabinet?
Yes, okay.
And so this is why they do not want this type of sequel. I mean, Galaxian's going to get a sequel, Galaga. And the sequel adds a whole bunch of new features that Galaxian didn't have, but another one is basically more stuff on the screen and a slightly more challenging game. This is where Miss Pac-Man, as we will see in a short period of time, starts out as an add-on board for Pac-Man that was just going to swap out the graphics, change the maze layout, improve the AI, and make the whole thing a little bit faster. Okay. That was the original plan for what became Miss Pac-Man, and the guys who developed it were so good that when they got sued, basically part of the settlement was, we're just going to sell it to you and we'll turn it into this game, Miss Pac-Man. And then, curiously enough, there were then people who sold add-on boards to speed up Miss Pac-Man. And there's so many of these sped up Miss Pac-Mans out there that virtually every original Miss Pac-Man machine that's still out in the wild in some bar or something is probably one of them running the speed up board.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Kid, you went to those arcade places, didn't you?
Oh yeah. I grew up in
Did you enjoy more the sped up version or the original ones?
Well, I'll be honest, this original batch of games where the speed up boards were really still a thing, those they weren't really my era. I mean, I came into it a little bit later. By the time I'm really playing in the arcades in a hardcore way, the speed up board idea has gone, partially because they started the manufacturers added in settings that the arcade operator could change to make a game easier or harder. So you can actually change the difficulty on them in the settings. A great example of this is I once beat Virtua Fighter 3 blindfolded, basically. I chose the sumo wrestler character, held down the joystick, and just hit the kick button over and over again, and it played through the entire game. Beat all of the enemies.
Enjoy the challenge?
Well, it just basically came down to the fact that the machine had been set to relative easy mode. And so the AI was dumbed down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so basically this becomes one of the ways that the manufacturers bypass these boards, because they're like, well, if you're seeing your players in your arcade playing for too long, just here we're giving you the option to do it. So they're going to essentially kill this market by adding features.
Okay. Well, interesting. So, forced evolution. One more question, and again, I don't want to dive too deeply into it. However, if the manufacturer of those cabinets didn't like those speed up boards to be added to it, how were those speed up boards added to it? How did speed up manufacturers make it possible to add this thing to the original cabinet?
Well, I mean, remember the game is basically just a computer. So you got boards and chips. So sometimes it was just, pop off a chip and put in this new chip.
Oh, okay. And this new
sometimes
chip,
you'd have to solder something on.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it wasn't plug and play.
No, because they're not using standardized boards, but it's plug and play in the sense that you take the chip off and you put a new chip in.
And the new chip already had the software. Gotcha.
Yeah. And remember that we're not talking about everyday consumers. We're talking about arcade operators. And if you're an arcade operator someplace in Boise, Idaho, and you've got this machine that you paid thousands of dollars for, and it breaks down, you're not waiting in 1980 for the postman to pick up the components, send them to Atari, and wait for them to send you back a replacement. You're going to open it up and see if you can fix it yourself. So there's a certain amount of technical know-how that these people do have. Now, granted, once you move into the CPUs, to the computer tech, that ability to really interact with the hardware diminishes dramatically. But they know enough that if they buy one of these kits and it says, okay, solder this wire onto this node on the board, they can do that. They've been fixing pinball tables for decades at this point. They know how to fix these little contacts and stuff. And so for most of them, this is a relatively easy thing to do.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But good question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Want to move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
I'm flattered already. Anyhow, Columbia Pictures Gottlieb amusement machine division shows a loss. Oh, I butchered it.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, but it's okay. I think we got it. Columbia Pictures, the movie studio, bought pinball maker Gottlieb back in 1976. The latest financial reports for the studio are positive, with profits from the syndication rights to Barney Miller and distribution revenue from films like Kramer vs. Kramer being very profitable. The one downside of note, though, is the amusement machine division Gottlieb, which hasn't pivoted yet to video games.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is the era of the conglomerate. Do you know what a conglomerate is?
Yeah, just explain it to me.
Okay. Conglomerates were giant corporations that did not specialize into one area, but they basically tried to cover everything. And this was an idea that sprang out of, I want to say it was basically a reaction to the Great Depression. The idea that, okay, one industry goes under, it doesn't matter. You've got 20 other areas that you're in. So even if one thing goes bad, you're still covered. And the 1970s is basically the high point of this. This is why you have, for example, Gulf and Western own Sega. And they also own, I believe, Paramount Pictures. And they own every other imaginable type of industry. And Columbia Pictures here, television, movie studio, and they're getting into pinball machines. It doesn't really make any sense, but the idea was, well, we're in the entertainment business. We have to be in every version of the entertainment business. And these conglomerates are going to start to crumble in the 1980s. They're going to start shedding every part of the company that doesn't make sense anymore.
I mean, it makes sense, doing everything on a mediocre level. Maybe not.
Well, also here, suddenly you've got a company that clearly knows how to make filmed entertainment, and they've got a pinball division. They don't know how to make money off of pinball in the age of video, and it's pulling down the profits of the company as a whole. And that's just bad business. And so Gottlieb is going to pivot into video. Gottlieb will have some success with video, but it's never going to quite be a powerhouse. And it's just an interesting sort of glimpse into this world at this time, both from a corporate structure, but also to see the financial well-being of companies that haven't moved into video yet.
Okay, cool story. Well, other than Atari more than doubles revenue and quadruples profits.
Warner Communications, the parent company of Atari, can't believe its luck. Atari continues to explode with revenue soaring and no end in sight. Income from the division rose from $5.6 million in the third quarter of 1979 to $21 million in the third quarter of 1980. And these are, you have to basically quadruple this to get modern numbers.
This is really incredible. So, I was about to ask what they used the money for, but history told us, nothing too successful. Anyhow.
Well, yeah, Warner Communications owns publishing companies, Warner Movie Studios, et cetera, and a bunch of other stuff. And Atari at this point in time, with the success of the VCS and the arcade unit, are quite literally eclipsing the rest of the corporation. They are becoming the driver of the entire conglomerate. And they're going to start to rely, and they're going to start to take on debt based on the continued success of the Atari division.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not going to work out too well for them. But that's a story that's still a little bit off. It will still come to fruition.
Yes.
Yeah. But we're not done with Atari yet.
Atari is seeking the Space Invader champion.
In a huge marketing move for the 2600 port of Space Invaders, Atari has launched a nationwide championship competition for Space Invaders. Regional competitions have been held in places like Chicago and New York. The ultimate winner, Rebecca Heinemann, would go on to be a groundbreaking game developer.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. Have you seen that Netflix documentary High Score?
Yeah, my girlfriend doesn't want us to watch it, and further.
They actually did a whole episode about this and talk. Now, Rebecca Heinemann is Rebecca today. Back then, I can't remember what her name was, but she was a boy back then. And she does win this competition. And this, what we're reporting on here is an article from the New York Times where they talked about the New York Championship. And and sort of I think one of the semifinals. But yeah, Rebecca does go on, does a whole bunch of interesting stuff, works on, I believe, Bard's Tale 3. That's, I think, the first computer RPG in the West, at least, that had female characters that you could choose and stuff. Whole very long, stellar career. There's a link to her Wikipedia entry in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, start in Atari VCS Space Invaders Championship.
So she's basically the first esports winner in the world.
Nah, I mean, before that, you probably also had some local competitions and whatnot, and arcades were putting stuff on like that all the time. But the whole idea of having this nationwide thing for the port of Space Invaders, number one, shows the popularity of Space Invaders, and it really does become the game that cements the 2600 as a huge platform. But it's more a question at this point of it's a one-time thing. There's not going to be a second competition. There's not going to be a league. There's not going to be, who's the champion next year. So it's not really esports as we would think of it today. It was just a one-time competition.
And also, I mean, it was a huge marketing move for Atari. So do you have rumors about the selling numbers of Space Invaders, the 2006?
The 2600 version of Space Invaders, I'm sure that those numbers are out there and that there is no way that I'm just Googling them right now. Because that would be totally unprofessional of me and not something that we would ever do. But according to my sources, aka Wikipedia, it sold over 2 million units in its first year on sale as a home console game.
Jesus. Yeah.
And that's just the first year. I mean, it kept selling for quite a while on the 2600.
Not bad, not bad. So, Cool.
Yeah. I mean, the arcade game, now they're talking here, Space Invaders was a huge commercial success. Now, whether or not this includes all versions, probably. They're saying by 1982 it had grossed $3.8 billion.
Oh,
But I'm
Lord.
not sure what that's including. Is that just coin? Is that including coin drop, or is that just arcade unit sales? That would make a huge difference.
Oh, this is actually something I wanted to ask you for a very long time, and I always forgot about it. Can you explain the licensing model of those arcade cabinets to me? So the arcade owner buys the cabinet from the manufacturer, and is it like a one-time lump sum, or is it like a lump sum and also some shares of the profit?
Oh, well, see, here, this is where an interview that I just did last week, which should be out on the Patreon in the next few weeks, would be appropriate to answer this, because I actually got to talk and had an extensive interview with an arcade operator from this era. But that I will put that aside, and you'll have to listen to that. But to answer your question, this was almost exclusively a you bought the cabinet, you get to keep the money deal. Now, there were arrangements where there would be a split, but that was usually only if the cabinet was being prototyped or some other special occurrence was happening. For the most part, the manufacturers were, and this is 99.9% of sales, the manufacturer was selling this piece of hardware and was, other than for maintenance issues and warranty issues, was never going to be involved with it again. After that, it was up to the operator who bought it to decide what was going to happen with it.
So, and also this explains why some of those operators were like soldering speed-up boards and whatnot to the arcade cabinet.
Amongst other things, yeah. And this was another topic that came up in the discussion, where the modifications that the operators might make, like, for example, if a game was very popular and had a very small coin drawer, and coin drawers on very popular games could get clogged because there were too many coins in there, and the operator might only be coming by the location once a week to empty the coins, well, suddenly they just tear out the old coin drawer and make a much bigger one, or puncture a hole in the coin drawer and put another one underneath it and stuff like this. All sorts of weird modifications.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the it just came by like once a week. So who was running this place?
Well, I mean, they put it in a bar, for example.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking huge arcade places where you have like machine next to machine next to.
No, the giant arcades were also their own operators, for the most part. Now, there were other, and again, this is all covered in the interview. It's a great interview. I'm looking forward to sharing that one with everybody. It took me long enough to actually track down somebody with experience. He was the third generation. His grandfather had started during the Great Depression. During the 1920s, during the speakeasy era, during Prohibition. He was doing jukeboxes for things like speakeasies. And he was then the third generation. He stuck with it up until the 2000s. So there's tons of amazing stories in this interview. And I'm looking forward to everybody hearing it, but I still have to sit down, edit it. And I've got like 5 other interviews that are also already recorded that I haven't edited and posted yet. So again, you want to hear all this fun stuff, go over to Patreon.
I knew that you you had this interview, but it's funny how things turn out to be fitting.
Yes. No, yeah, this one's a really good one. Oh, I'm very proud of this one. So, But yeah, the idea here is that they owned it. They could do it as they wanted. In the big arcades, the ones that were exclusively arcades, the operator was the operator in 90% of the cases. In some of the big family entertainment centers, places that would have mini golf and laser tag and so forth, quite often there the arcade games were actually brought in by an outside operator, and they would simply split the take with the house. So this was the case of where I worked as a teenager, Seattle Funplex. So in case any listeners remember the Seattle Funplex in the 90s, drop me a line. And there the facility owned the eatery. We owned the laser tag, the batting cages, the mini golf, the bumper cars, the bouncy house, those weird tube things that little kids run around and pee in, and the redemption games. But what we didn't own were the video games, and we had a really big arcade, about 60, 70 machines, plus a whole bunch of pinballs. And those were all owned by an outside operator who would only come in every once in a while, maintain the machines, bring in something new, switch a couple things out. So we had a lot of machines that were there for forever, and then other ones that would get switched out on a regular basis, just depending on how they were performing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to the interview.
Oh, as am I. So, moving on.
Leave the arcade world and move into the PCMR-ish world. Sublogic Flights are reviewed by Kiloboard Magazine.
Clocking in at a whopping 5 frames per second, the realism of Sublogic's flight simulator is truly unparalleled in the microcomputer market. Is this finally a killer app for the Apple II?
Answer?
Yes. Yes, indeed. So, you might be thinking 5 frames a second seems kind of weak. And we've talked about Sublogic advertising their 3D modeling software before. And we're also starting to see the professionalization of game reviews in these magazines, where it's not just, oh, this is interesting that somebody decided to send us a game. But now we're starting to see game reviews become a regular part of all of these magazines. And it's forcing the magazines also to move away from computer users are programmers making their own software to computer users are people buying pre-made software to use that already fulfills what they need, and the programming is going to relatively quickly shift into the background. And so, this is why I included it here. It's basically those two things converging at the same time.
And do we also have like an editorial where someone writes that players are going to be dumbed down by this development?
Where the computer will simply become a weird gaming device as opposed to a intelligent and sophisticated piece of equipment for the betterment of humanity?
Yep.
Yeah, basically all over the place, constantly. And the PC Master Race essentially at this point is, well, I don't want to say that they're really against games because they're not against games. Remember, these are the hardcore geeks that play D&D and stuff. And this is why so many of the games that have come so far haven't really been rejected. Quite the contrary, they've been invited in because these people love this kind of crap. I mean, there's no greater problem solving than programming. And a game like Zork, or one of the early Epic's role-playing games, is doing just that. And this flight simulator thing is also, not just fly around and kill stuff. In fact, there is nothing to kill. It's just fly around in this plane.
Cool.
Yeah. Now, the really interesting thing, and I'll include a link in the show notes, this was also released for the TRS-80. And the interesting thing about that is that unlike the Apple II, the TRS-80 doesn't have a graphics mode.
Yeah.
So it's a flight simulator basically using character sets to represent the vector graphics. You have to see it to believe it. Well, take a look at it in your off time. It's fascinating.
Oh Lord, really?
Yeah, it's fascinating because it actually kind of works, and I have no idea how they pulled it off. It's really quite cool. Okay, and we're not done with game reviews yet.
Broderbund's Galactic Empire trilogy gets reviewed in Soft Talk magazine.
The first 3 games from industry pioneers Broderbund get tested in Soft Talk magazine. The Galactic Empire trilogy, a series of action strategy hybrid games. And it's actually more just strategy games, but yeah.
There wasn't so much action going on in those games back in the days.
When you're dealing with an Apple II of this era, their action really isn't an option. You have to remember moving anything on the screen is nightmarishly slow.
Slow-mo fist fight.
Yeah, but the cool thing is these games are unbelievably complex. These Galactic Empire games where you're moving around tons of planets and systems and trading and trying to build up armies or influence. And I mean, it's really, really impressive stuff for the era. And it's the first games written by Doug Carlson. Now, 2 of them had already been released in 79, but what we're seeing here in 1980 with the release of the 3rd game is also them bringing them out in a more sophisticated fashion with better packaging. They're also starting to push the promotion of the product more themselves, whereas at the beginning they had non-exclusive distributorships through a variety of different companies, including Scott Adams Adventure International. And so the whole idea of them getting this review in Soft Talk magazine really shows that Broderbund is now on the stage, and Broderbund is going to go on to some great things. I mean, they're the company that's going to give us Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. They're going to give us Shuffle Puck Cafe, Raid Over Bungling Bay, the game that will inspire SimCity, and so on and so forth. I mean, and to say nothing of Print Shop. So they're a huge, huge company, super important, and this is where they're getting their start.
Okay.
And if you want to hear more about them, check out our Don Daglow interview because he was a producer there for several years.
You should. You should.
Yes, definitely. Link in the show.
Moving on.
Yes.
Yeah, and yes, it is. Moving on. Acorn Adam introduced at the Personal Computer World show.
Very good. Back in September, we talked about how Clive Sinclair was showing off the ZX80 at CES. Well, he has some competition back home in the form of Acorn's Atom computer, being shown off at the 3rd Personal Computer World Show in London. Acorn, a company founded by former Sinclair employees, is sporting the 6502 chip at its heart, has 2K of RAM, and a full keyboard. It's twice as pricey as the ZX80 at $400, but you get quite a bit for it.
And did it get any market share?
The Acorn Atom didn't really make huge waves. It got a little bit of market share, but what it does do is it establishes these 2 competing English companies. And both of these 2 computers are also going to show the way that they're going to expand their architecture in the future. Sinclair is going to stick with the Z80 processor. Acorn is going to stick with the 6502 base chips. And their next generation of machines are going to also be using those chips. So Sinclair, obviously, the ZX Spectrum, which is going to be using a Z80. And Acorn is going to get the contract to do the BBC Micro. And that BBC microcomputer, which is going to be in every classroom in England in the 1980s as they push computer tech as the future of England. And there's going to be a show on the BBC that supports it and everything else. That's also going to be a 6502 system. And these two very divergent processors are basically the big battleground for the 1980s. And if you want a better understanding of the rivalry between these two companies, I highly recommend the BBC movie Micromen, which actually portrays the conflict between the founders of the two companies and how Acorn split off from Sinclair Research and started their own thing. And of course, Acorn today, or better said, the successor to Acorn, is ARM, the company that makes the chip in everything we use today. ARM.
Not all companies die. Cool.
Yeah, no. Well, Acorn as a company morphs over time. That's a long history that we'll cover as we go through the history of the industry. But Acorn is going to then leave the 6502 behind when they move to 16-bit, and they're going to basically say RISC processors, which are limited instruction processors, are going to be the future. They decide not to use the 68000 for their 16-bit machine, the Archimedes. Instead, they develop what they call the ARM chip, the Archimedes RISC machine, ARM. And nowadays the A doesn't stand for Archimedes anymore, but that's what it stood for originally. And that basic architecture is still what we're using in phones and cell phones and the Raspberry Pi and everything else. And everything from the Raspberry Pi to your cell phone chip, it basically comes out of this Acorn company tradition. Yeah, so this is why it's a hugely important company that most people outside of England have never heard of before, but probably one of the most influential companies to ever exist.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And talking about influential companies, let's move on. Apple goes Irish.
In its first move outside of the USA, Apple has opened a production facility in Ireland and distribution offices in Holland. Now, the Irish plant in Cork would ultimately become the source of their Irish tax haven that would lead to an EU investigation and massive fines. So, yeah, what can I say about this one? Well, I can let you talk about this. You're the MBA. Tell us all about it.
Thanks for giving me no preparation time whatsoever.
Hey, you had like 2 hours ahead of time. I told you what was coming.
No, you just told me the Apple thing comes. But no. We are not delving into this entire lawsuit mess that's going on right now.
It's not a mess. Basically, the Cork plant gives them an excuse to theoretically have the minimum number of workers necessary to qualify as a company in Ireland, and for a specific tax status that would give them between 0 and 0.25% tax liability. So that's why they were able to move over $110 billion worth of gains over to Ireland and pay zero taxes on it from around the world. And they have the plant in Cork It employs 7,000 people. It's supposed to be a manufacturing plant, but 600 of those 7,000 work from home. So if you've ever known how to work at a manufacturing plant as a telecommuter, you please let me know. So yes, basically this probably wasn't the original plan with the plant in Cork, but at some point somebody decided that this was the way to go. And it's also not surprising that this big move is coming right before the U.S. Stock flotation, the IPO, because it's obviously good headlines that are going to help boost the stock price even further.
Of course.
And how do we end every episode?
Yes.
Or we try at least.
My favorite topic, and this time it hits MITS, the set fate of MITS.
MITS, or Microinstrumentation and Telemetry Systems, the granddaddy of the microcomputer market, which introduced the Altair 8800 back in 1975, one can quibble, late 1974, is, according to a report in 80 Microcomputing, all but dead. After the company was sold to Pertec in 1977, which has pretty much run the company into the ground through a misguided attempt to refocus on the business as opposed to the hobbyist market, Pertec was sold to Triumph Adler, or I should say Triumph Adler, a German computer company subsidiary of Volkswagen, age of conglomerates, in 1978, and now, according to the report, nothing is left, with the latest product line ditching the original S100 bus standard and the original New Mexico production facilities being closed down. So, Altair 8800, tell you anything?
Oh yeah, we talked about this.
Yep. Well, yeah, it's the end of an era. The original microcomputer, the one that gets Bill Gates and Paul Allen started, the one that gets the first big computer clubs going, and they just never were able to make it out of the hobbyist build your own stuff type of market into a proper ready to go in a box computer.
Yes.
Sad.
Well, yes, totally sad. You know, to me 1980 is so far away. I might not share the emotional spectrum you're experiencing right now.
Well, while I personally don't remember 1980, or at least don't remember much of 1980, the fact that the company that started the microcomputer business, you just have to understand, you have to have some connection with it, because without this machine, we don't have the world we have today. Now, somebody was going to build it. There's no doubt about that. But somebody had to do it first. The fact that they did it, and that it was as successful as it was, you got to have a little respect for it. And it's kind of one of those moments where you just have to bow your head and be like, you know, moment of silence for the dead that accomplished something.
Yeah. Okay, now the moment is gone.
Yeah, that's it. So that ends our trip back to November of 1980. Guess we're just going to head back to good old 2020, that wonderful, wonderful year that we're all enjoying so very, very much, and say our farewells to our listeners, our thanks to our patrons, and we'll see you next time when we turn on the time machine and head back to November of 1990. Any parting words, Peter?
See you soon, guys.
Okay, talk to you then.
Wait.
Right?
We need the secret word.
Oh yeah, what should be the secret word for the episode?
Altair.
Altair. Very good. Secret word is Altair. Okay, everybody, have fun.